Hi, in this video I will discuss for loops. Many objects in Python are iterable, meaning we can iterate over every element in the object, such as every element in a list or every character in a string. Now, that means we can use for loop to execute a block of code for every iteration. So I want to focus a little bit more on this term iterable because you hear it a lot, especially in the Python documentation, as well as it's kind of a strange term if you have never heard it before. Now, all this term means is that you can iterate over an object, so that means you can perform some actions for everything that's in the object. So for example, you can iterate over every character in a string and do something for every character, like print it out to the screen or drop it from the string or something silly like that. Or maybe you can iterate through every item in a list and do something with it, or iterate over every key in the dictionary and do something with it. Now let's start with a quick prototype and example just to get you acquainted with Python for loops. So the way Python for loop works is that first we have this keyword for, and then a variable we can declare in the for loop. So this can be anything. I have just written my variable or just a variable. You can write it whatever you want to write it. You can just change it to whatever. And then the in keyword, and then the object that we want to iterate through. And after that we have statement or block of statements that we can execute. So now let's understand everything one by one. So iterable is the collection of objects, for example, a list or a tuple or a string, and the statements in the for loop body are denoted by indentation, as with all the Python control structures. The way we looked at it in if conditions and are executed once for each item in iterable. Like the statements, this gets executed once for each item in the iterable. The loop variable where takes on the value of the next element in the iterable each time through the loop. So let's look at an example, and I hope that will make everything clear. So I'm in the Jupyter notebook, and let's create a list by the name of list underscore, or let's make it my list, because we cannot write list because list is a reserved keyword. If you do that, we'll get an error or we will mess something up in the Jupyter notebook. Anyway, in order to name my list, I will name it my list and make it equal to 1. Okay, now the list has been created and initialized. Let's run it, and we have this list. If I'm willing to print it out, I will just write my list, press shift and enter, and you will see the list will come over in the output. So now if we are willing to iterate through each element of this list, what we'll do, we'll just write for, and we'll create a temporary variable. Let's name it n, or let's make it num, whatever you want. You can do note that you can just name this variable anything you want. It's not necessary to name it num or something like that. It's just a normal variable, and you can do whatever you want to do with it. Now, for num in, and now we have to provide the list that we have previously created, and then colon. After the colon, I will press enter, and I will come over to the body of for loop. You can see the indentation. This indentation means that we are in the body of for loop. Now we can do anything with this my list or with num. We can print it out to the screen. We can also add it. We can do whatever we want to do, but let's just, for the sake of simplicity, print it out to the screen, and let's look at what happens. So as soon as I press shift and enter, you can see that the for loop iterated over each element in this list, and it printed out each number at a time. So in the first iteration, we printed out 1, in the second 2, 3, 4, and so on and so forth. Now let's look at another example, and for that I will create I'll make it equal to a list, and the first element in the list would be foo, The next would be bar, and the next one would be BAZ. Now I will press shift and enter, and we'll do the same thing with this as well. We'll write a for loop, and instead of this num, I will make this variable I, and instead of this list, I will provide A. And instead of this num, I will print I. If I press shift and enter, you would see that foo, bar, and buzz. So in these both examples, my list is iterable in this for loop or in this example, while in this example, A is the iterable. Let's focus on this example. In this example, the where I is the variable I. Each time through the loop, I takes on a successive item in A, so print displays the values foo, bar, and buzz respectively. A for loop like this is the Pythonic way to process the items in an iterable. This loop can be described entirely in terms of concept you have just learned about. To carry out the iteration, this for loop calls the iter function to obtain an iterator for A. Call the next function repeatedly to obtain each item for the iterator. In turn, terminates the loop when next raises the stop iteration exception. The loop body is executed once for each item next returns with variable I set to the given item for each iteration. If all this is confusing, no problem. Let's explore all these concepts in Jupyter Notebook, and you will understand everything in great details. So we have looked at two examples. The first one was this for loop. So what it did was we gave this for loop my list, and for the first iteration, the first element of this my list was assigned to this num, and we came over to the body of this for loop and we printed out num to the screen. And we did this repetitively for the entire list until the list was finished. We did the same thing with this foo, bar, and buzz as well. Now let's explore some more examples, and I hope that will clear up the air. Now suppose we have this my list, and we just want to print out the even numbers. So what we'll do, we'll write the same for loop, and we'll print the number in it, but we'll just add one condition, and that would be if num modulus. And if you have watched our previous video, what this modulus would do, it will just divide this number with 2 and it will return the remainder. And we want to check the remainder. If the remainder is equal to 0, then this number is even and we want to print it out to the screen. Else we want to do nothing. So let's press shift and enter. And let's press shift and enter, and you will see we will get an error. It's because we didn't add a colon right over here. If I then press shift and enter, you will see that we just have this even numbers. So let's make it more interesting by adding some string literals, and we'll write the number is even. And inside the round brackets, we'll add this num. Now if I press shift and enter, you will see that this number is even and it's 2. Now let's add the else part too. So in else, we want to print f strings and the number is odd. And we also want to print the number as well. And if this is confusing for you, don't worry, I will link down some string interpolation videos that will make you understand what these f strings are and how to concatenate things in a print statements or how to work with strings in Python. I will also link down the expressions where we explain what modulus is and how it works. All of the links would be in the description. So if you're willing to look it out, just go to the description. Anyway, for those of you who did understand what we did right over here, we just printed out the even and odd numbers separately with separate print statements. Now let's look at some more examples. So suppose you want to sum each element of this list. Like suppose we want to get the sum of the entire list. So how can we do that? Well, we'll do the same thing. We'll write the same for loop, and we have this number. But before this for loop, we will do one thing, and we'll create, and that would be we'll create a variable by the name of sum is equal to 0. And right in this for loop, what we'll do sum is equal to sum plus num. And after the loop ends, so do note that with one indentation, we are in the body of for loop. As soon as we remove the indentation, we are outside of the for loop. So this print statement will get executed once the for loop is finished. So I just want to print out the sum right over here. And I think it's a reserved keyword. So let's make it my sum. Let's change it everywhere so that we doesn't get into some problem. So I've changed the sum to my sum, and now if I press Shift and Enter, you will see that we get 55. And it's because the sum of these all numbers are, if we add this and this, we get 3 and 3, 6, and so on and so forth, till we get the 55. So it's the last one. So now this print statement is outside the for loop. Let's make it inside the for loop and see what we get. So we get sum printed out each time in the loop. So for the first time, the sum was 1. For the second time, it was 3. For the third time, it was 6, and 10, 15, till it was 55. And that's the last statement. That's the last iteration. So far we were working with lists. Now let's also look at how can we iterate over the strings as well. So let's create a string by the name of my string and make it equal to this is my string. And once the string gets created, now let's create a for loop. And that for loop would be for each letter in my string do something. So that would be print letter. And I will press Shift and Enter, and you will see that the for loop will print each letter at a time. So if I just print my string, it will be completely a different story. But here you can see that it prints out each letter, each iteration letter by letter. Now, so far we have looked at how the for loop works with list, as well as we have looked at how the for loop works with strings. Let's also look at how to iterate through tuples. So I'll create a tuple by the name of my tup and make it equal to 1, 2, 3. If we are willing to iterate through a tuple, we can just do write for loop and then write t. And do note that you would say that for strings it would be a letter, and for t it would be for tuple it would be t. It's not the case. You can name this variable anything you want. You can just name it trump or something like that. The for loop doesn't really matter what name you give this variable. So trump in my, or just a single element in my tup, and we'll just print that out to the screen. Right now I cannot think of some useful thing, but I hope you are able to understand what we are willing to do right over here. So you can see that it just prints out 1, 2, 3, and that's pretty much simple, the way we did with the list or with the strings. So for loop is pretty simple to understand and to work with. That's why for the first like in this first video, I just explained for loop. In the next video, we'll look at while loop, which is a little bit complicated than the for loop. Now, so far you have seen working with tuples, strings, and list. Now let's also understand how the for loop works with a list, with a tuple inside a list. So let's create one, and that would be my list 2, and we'll make it equal to a list, and inside that list we will be having some tuples. So that would be 1, 2, this would be the first element, and then we will be having 3, 4, and then 5, 6, and then 7, 8. So these are the elements we have in a list. So do not confuse this list with this tuple. So in this my list, we have the first element as this first tuple 1, 2, the second element as this 3, 4 tuple, and the third and the fourth respectively. Now if we are willing to loop through, what we'll do, we'll write for tup in my list 2, print tup. I will press shift and enter, and you can see that first element printed out, second, third, fourth, and fifth. Third, fourth. We don't have any fifth elements. Sorry for that. Anyway, this is the way you can work with tuples inside list or dictionaries inside list or something like that. So we can also unpack these tuples. Like sometimes you will get some data and you will just be willing to work with this 1 or either 2. So how can you unpack this tuple and work with it? Well, it's pretty simple. So you just write A, B in the format of this tuple. And what this for loop will do, it will assign this first element to this A and the second element to this B. So there are two ways to write this down. The first one is like this without brackets, and the second one is with brackets. And if I press shift and enter, you will see that I just printed out the tup. We didn't want it to print that out. We'll just write two statements. So the first one will print out the A and the second one will print out B. So if I press shift and enter, you will see that we just get everything in sequence. So the first iteration, in the first iteration, first we print out this A and then this 2. So if I comment this statement down, you will see that we just get these first elements, so which was 1, 3, 7, 5. And if I just comment the first statement and then print out, we just get the second elements in the tuple. So this is basically tuple unpacking in for loop. So far we are going really great. We have discussed tuples, we have discussed strings, we have discussed lists, and much more. Now in the last, let's also look at how the for loop works with dictionaries, and we'll wrap the video up there. So let's create a dictionary and make it equal to D is equal to, the first key would be K1, and let's just make it equal to 1, comma, and I will just copy and paste because I'm really lazy. So the first key would be K1, the second would be K2, and we'll make it equal to 2, and the third one would be 3, we'll make it equal to 3. And that's it. Let's make it equal to 3, not 4. And I will press shift and enter, and the dictionary has been created. Now if we are willing to iterate through this dictionary, we'll write for and then item in D. So what we are saying, for each item in D, and I just accidentally pressed shift and enter. Let's just print something out. So what we wrote down right over here is, for every item in D, print out the item. And what this will print out would be just the keys. Because by default, if we are willing to iterate through a dictionary in for loop, it will just iterate over its keys and not the actual elements. Now if we are willing to iterate through the keys and the elements, what we will do, we'll just write in front of this D, we'll just write items. And if I press shift and enter, you will see that we'll get this K1, we'll just get the output as the key and the value in the form of a tuple. Now right over here, what you can do is you can just work with it the way we work with this tuple unpacking. Instead of this item, you just write A and B, and if you press shift and enter, you will see that you will get the same result. It's not the same result, but we can just work with this as print A and then print B. And if I press shift and enter, you will see that in the first A, so this is the method of tuple unpacking. We can just get all of the elements through this tuple unpacking. So it's right over here. Now you would say that, okay, you can do this with the tuple unpacking, but what if you just need the values? So I'll just copy and paste this in the next cell, and instead of this item, I will write values. And if I press shift and enter on, instead of this A and B, and using the tuple unpacking, I will just make it simple, and you can see that we just have these values from the dictionary. So you would say that I can use this tuple unpacking as well as I can just get the values, but what if you just need the keys from the dictionary? So that's simple too. You can just write, instead of these values, keys, press shift and enter, and you can see that you will just get the keys. So this is pretty much it for this video. I hope you did understood what I wanted to show you. So the main purpose of this video was to make you understand how the for loop works, how you can iterate through a list, how you can iterate through a string, and how you can iterate through a tuple, and how you can iterate through a dictionary. So this is pretty much it for this video. I hope you did learn something new. If you did, give a thumbs up to this video. If not, give it the thumbs down, or do whatever you want. Leave a comment if you didn't understand something. So till next time, enjoy hacking, stay cheeky bricky, and peace out. I will see you in the next video though. We will learn about while loops. Bye bye.